What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for listening to the Pastor's Perspective program. My name is Brian Perez, and it's a very special edition of Pastor's Perspective today. In the studio with me, Brian Brodersen, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. You also hear him on the Back to Basics radio program. And our special guest this hour, none other than Greg Laurie, the founder and pastor of Harvest Church and the Harvest Crusade. The SoCal Harvest happening at Angel Stadium in Anaheim this Sunday, one night only, this Sunday, October 3rd. Gates open at 5 o'clock. The event starts at 7. You can get all the details at socal.harvest.org. But Greg and Brian and I will just be here talking for the next hour about lots of stuff, including the history of the Crusades. This is the first one in 2 years. We had a great streak going for a while, 30 years in a row.
I know.
Then I guess the Lord said, you got to take a year off every 30 years. So,
yeah. But it was a good thing because we pivoted and we did a movie. Mm-hmm. We called it a cinematic crusade. I wasn't even sure what we were doing when we started it, but I said, let's just do on a screen what we do in person, take all the best elements of it. And I work with some very talented filmmakers, Kingdom Productions, John Irwin, who did I Can Only Imagine. Ben Smallbone, who is the brother of Luke and Joel Smallbone, who basically are for King and Country, was the director, very talented, Andrea Royer working with him. So we put this thing together called A Rush of Hope and ended up reaching a lot more people than we would have reached in a crusade. So we were thinking, okay, that's what we'll do this year. But then, we had a flattening of the curve. This is pre-Delta variant. So we thought maybe we could get one night at Angel Stadium. And it worked out. Everything came together. And so we're there one night this year. Of course, it's this Sunday night. But we're still going to do the movie because the movies have been so effective. We're going to just keep doing these because we're reaching a whole new audience. It's like an evangelistic, high-quality cinematic experience, but it has the gospel in it.
That's great.
So is this movie going to be kind of going on the same theme as Sunday night?
Yes. Yeah. And the theme is fame.
Fame.
So when you come in, you're gonna see that we're kind of springboarding out the idea of fame.
Like David Bowie fame?
Well, sure, if you want. I mean, just fame in general, because I'm basing it on a survey was done from USA Today among their young readers, and they asked them the question, what do you want more than anything else? The vast majority of them said, I want to be rich and famous, because so many people think that's the answer. So we sort of deconstruct that idea, like, oh, is that true? If being rich and famous is so fulfilling, then why are there so many miserable rich and famous people? Why have so many taken their own lives? Why have so many overdosed on drugs? Maybe it's not what it's cracked up to be. Of course, we know it isn't, And so we sort of explored, and I have an in-depth interview that I did with Darryl Strawberry, who, sports icon, and Alice Cooper. And so we'll feature elements of those. So we're sort of bringing cinematic elements into the crusade, things that we filmed that we use later in the movie. But then ultimately I'm going to give, the biblical answer, because I think deep down inside, we all want our lives to matter. We all want to be noticed. We all want to have significance. These are not bad things. God wired us this way. But we go after the wrong ways to fulfill it. And so I'm kind of using that as a springboard. I always have a springboard, some theme, but ultimately I'm just a preacher telling people how to know Jesus.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Exactly. And so is that going to air this weekend as well?
No, the movie will come in a couple of months in early 2022.
Oh, okay.
And it will be like a rush of hope. We'll roll it out. It'll be on every platform we can find. But there'll be elements of it in this weekend, or this Sunday, I should say. But we're kind of going to the next level. We're bringing special lighting, special extra screens. So it's going to be more of an immersive experience, because I thought, okay, we're going to do this again, but we're not going to do it the way we've done it. We always want to do it a little differently, bring something new into it, something different into it. I want to keep it very current with what's going on in culture, not just do it the way we've always done it. But so some things change. Tech changes, music changes, but the gospel doesn't change. So that part is just going to be a very straightforward, understandable, loving, biblical message where I'm going to tell people how to come into a relationship with Christ. So I really depend on Christians to bring people to the
Yes.
event. That's how we get non-believers there.
Yeah. So an interesting thing, and I've seen this, watching you. So the whole COVID thing, obviously we all went through all kinds of gymnastics with COVID. Our churches were closed. Everything was in lockdown. It was all online and stuff. But you guys really, like in an extraordinary way, I think you saw this as an opportunity. Like, okay, we're going to seize this moment.
Yeah.
And we're going to shoot for actually a bigger audience. And God's blessed that, right?
Yes. It's a funny thing, Brian. We were actually, before the pandemic hit, I talked to my guys and I said, I want to take our online service much more seriously. So we went and met with Craig Rochelle, who's kind of the guy. He's the guy. Craig's a great guy, so smart, so innovative. Seeing how they did it, so we were sort of building the infrastructure already and laying the track sort of like, okay, let's get this thing really going and let's do it right. And then boom, like literally, I remember when everything's going into lockdown and you can't be out in the streets past this hour. It's like, good night. Who would have ever even thought such a thing could happen? So we went in and we started creating these online services, which we're still doing. We call it Harvest at Home. So we're slowly rebuilding our church. Our church in in-person attendance is not as large as it was. We're getting there, but it's not this. But the online audience, it's just huge. It's just so much larger, and so what we really do is the whole service is directed toward a viewer. As opposed to, here we're having our service and there's a camera over there on the side and you can kind of join in. No, I'm really directing it toward the viewer. And we found that's very effective. And people are really responsive because, people are looking at these screens all day long. And so we're thinking, well, let's get on those screens where people are looking and try to reach them.
So is Harvest at Home, is it the Sunday service just on video, or are you doing something now kind of separate for that, and then you're doing your regular Sunday service as well?
I do it separate. I go in and I film it, and I basically speak to the cameras. Yeah. And we have a special worship set just for those folks. Everything's geared to the viewers, which are literally all around the world now. Yeah. And so we talk to them, and then I take basically that same message and I give it in person at Harvest Riverside and Harvest OC.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So here's I think just such an interesting thing to note, because I think so many people in the church think that, COVID is a conspiracy. Some people think that, obviously a lot of people think it's of the devil. But God has used this pandemic in an extraordinary way. Yeah. For somebody like you to be innovative with the gospel, but the innovation has come as people's hearts have actually been softened because of the pandemic.
Yes.
So I have had so many conversations with friends that live in different parts of the world who have told me about their neighbor, about somebody who would never give them one moment of time to hear anything about Jesus, who then are saying, Can I have that link to your? I think I want to tune in to your Bible message. This is happening all over the world.
Yes, it really is. And, all the wrong things are up. Drug use is up. Suicide is up. Self-harm is up. Divorce is up. Alcohol use is up. Depression is up. And it's because people are down. And Jesus said, when you see these things begin to happen, look up. And, I think COVID is a modern day plague. Does it fit into the end times events? Yeah, I would say it's a plague. It's global. It's real. It's affected all of us. But I think, some people go to extremes. I actually did an interview with USA Today where they asked the question, is the vaccine the mark of the beast? Because some people are saying that. Of course, my answer is no. Because A, we're not in the tribulation period. B, people that take the mark will know they're taking it. They'll be pledging allegiance to the Antichrist who's not been revealed. So the whole idea is pretty ridiculous. But there are people that believe it. But I think the fact is that people are thinking, is this it? Even non-believers are thinking, wait, is this it? I've always heard, about the end times. Is this maybe it? So it's really a great time for us to be a voice of calm, a voice of assurance, and a voice of clarity in a time of a lot of confusion, and open up the Bible, offer theology without apology. Here's what the Bible says. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. And by the way, Jesus didn't say when you see these things beginning to happen, freak out. He said, look up. So let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Yeah. But like you said, Brian, it's a great opportunity to engage people in evangelistic conversations because they're probably more open. I read this amazing stat the other day that 85% of non-believers said they would be willing to have a conversation with a Christian if the Christian really was passionate about what they believed, if it really mattered to them. So I thought, wow. Yeah. So, we build a certain amount of goodwill with friends and neighbors and family members, and then there comes a moment where you can say, can I talk to you about what really matters to me? And I think people are more open to that than we may think they are. And the cool thing about the Crusade is it's a little catalytic moment, because the hardest part about starting an evangelistic conversation is starting it. Like, how do you start? Like, what do I say? Has anyone ever told you about God? Right.
So how do you segue from nice shoes to, do you know where you're going
when you die?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can instead say, have you heard about that thing called Harvest at Angel Stadium? And you might be surprised that more people here in SoCal have heard about it than you think. Yeah, I saw the bumper stickers. What is that? Well, let me tell you what it is. And then you use that as sort of a conversation about the Lord. This is what it's about. And in fact, I'd love you to join me. Has anyone ever talked to you about these things before? Hardest part about evangelism is takeoff and landing, getting it started, and then sort of closing the deal if the Lord so directs you. So this is a little conversation starter, to invite them.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk real, briefly, I guess. I mean, you don't want to give away all of Sunday night, but what are we going to do Sunday night? I mean, obviously many listeners have been to a Harvest Crusade, and this is one night versus 3 nights. And so what are people going to be able to expect?
Well, I would say if you've been to a Harvest Crusade, you'll want to come to this because it's going to be different than any you've ever been to before. I'm posting some photos. If you follow me on social media, I'm going to post some videos. I'm going to go over there tonight when it gets dark. I'm going to film some of the stuff we're doing. It's going to be cool. Super, just next level. And not like it's a show. I think sometimes as Christians, we're afraid to say, it's a show. It should be ministry. Well, this will be kind of a show, but we're using tech to make it closer, to make it more immersive. Because the reality is when you're in a stadium, the band and me, we're like little specks on the stage. Right. So everyone looks at the screens. So we're going to bring in more screens and make it feel closer. And we're going to end up with a fireworks show. We have music from For King and Country. I think they're probably one of the best Christian bands out there right now. Great songs. They've had crossover success. They're great guys. They get it. They know what they're doing. They're there to honor the Lord, but they just do an amazing production. And then Phil Wickham, who, he's been coming to Harvest Crusade since he's been a little kid. Not long ago, I saw his parents, who I haven't seen for a long time, Phil Wickham and Lisa Wickham, his mom and dad. So his dad, as you know, Brian, is an incredibly good guitar player. And Lisa has the beautiful voice. And so Phil kind of got both of those gifts, and so he'll be there. He's been with us at many of these crusades. And then we have some other elements that people have not seen before. I think you're going to love it. But here's the great thing. If you can't make it to Angel Stadium, it's live at harvest.org. So you just go there and you can download the app for your iOS, your Apple phone, for your Android phone, for the Roku box, for the Apple TV. And then you can watch it on your TV or tablet, or you can just go to our website, harvest.org. So lots of ways to get there.
Very cool.
Cool. So let's talk about Alice Cooper.
Yes, Alice Cooper.
Who's she? If anybody asks, who's she? First of all, it's not a she.
Right, exactly. I remember years ago, and you probably remember this too, that we would hear little sort of rumors that Alice Cooper became a Christian. He golfed with R.C. Sproul or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, those were the rumors. But then there was never any real like evidence like, this had really happened, you know, and then you'd meet somebody who'd say, oh, no, I know it happened for sure.
Yeah.
But, you know, you have actually been having conversations with him and spending time with him.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember when I was just out of high school and I had a band. We played a gig in LA and school's out. Yes. It was the end of school. And so that was our theme for the night.
Yes.
Yeah, so
that should be your bumper for the next second. School's out for summer.
Yes.
Did you wear a top hat and have a little cane?
Well, that was just one song in our repertoire. So I didn't do that. But so tell us about how that's been, because I've been fascinated by that, you know.
Well, it all started when one of the guys that's on our staff, his name is Gabe, he heard Alice was a Christian, so he went to Alice's concert. He performed locally, went in the back room, met with Alice, and Alice was talking about his faith and had everyone pray before they went out. And he's going, wow, this guy's for real. And Alice said, hey, we always go to church on Sunday. You know, do you know of a church we can go to? And Gabe said, yeah, come to our church. So there's Alice sitting in the front row. He doesn't look like Alice Cooper. He just kind of, you know, he's him, but he's not wearing eye makeup or a top hat or a cane. He didn't have a stake around his neck. He's kind of a normal looking dude. So then we talked afterwards, and I started chatting with him. He said, boy, I'd like to interview you sometime. And he agreed. So I went out to Arizona and interviewed him. And then I went back and did it again. And we're going to include my interview in this film Fame. But Alice Cooper, to me, is one of the most amazing modern day conversion stories, because he really is an icon of the 60s. You know, we talk about the 27 Club. These are all the people that died of drug overdoses at 27. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison. So Alice said he was talking to this guy. He wanted to be his agent. This is 60s. He walks into a room. There's Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Jim Morrison all in the same room. He couldn't believe it. I thought it was like a dream. And so he knew these people. He was getting heavily into drugs. And the funny thing about Alice is he was a preacher's kid. He knew better, but he was rebelling against it. So fast forward, he becomes the #1 rock star in the world. He's it. This is early 70s. The Beatles have broken up. The hippie thing's over with. Now it's kind of his new form of rock and roll that influenced many bands to come from Twisted Sister to Marilyn Manson to Kiss. You know, that vibe of rock. And so Alice goes into drugs further, and so he gets to a point where he's in his house. He has all of his windows are covered up. He has a pistol. He has a rock of cocaine the size of a softball, and he's using it. And he says he looks in the mirror and he sees blood coming out of his eyes. He says, I don't know if I was hallucinating or if it was happening, but I knew I was dying, and I knew I needed to call out to God. So he did. And then he called his wife, who had left him, and said, I've just recommitted my life to the Lord. And her name is Cheryl. She said, I don't believe you. He goes, well, let me prove it to you. And then he started to change, and he did go into rehab, and he's been alcohol-free, drug-free for 30 years now.
Nice.
But he still goes out and performs as Alice Cooper. But he took all the kind of dark bits out of his thing, and it's just sort of like a performance, almost like he's playing a character. But he is the most normal, down-to-earth, fun to talk to guy, witty, more stories than you can believe, very upfront with his faith, very strong about what he believes about Jesus Christ. He goes to church every Sunday, and you know, so he's just like a great guy. And to me, it's like an amazing story.
That is so fascinating. And you know, here's the thing that's interesting to me, Greg, is how I was thinking about this the other day, and I was talking to somebody about it. It might have been even my wife, but I was thinking, you know, like, who are the rock stars today? I mean, are there any rock stars anymore? Is there, you know, are there any good songs, any good records, you know? And I was thinking about how so I have a 20-year-old grandson.
Yeah.
My 20-year-old grandson is listening to Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
He's listening to all the stuff that we listen to.
Yes.
And I think that even though those guys are from another generation, they still have incredible influence over the culture.
Yeah.
And I think so. Alice Cooper, even though I was doing Alice Cooper songs when I was 19 years old.
Could you bring us back to that moment and do it again?
No, I would not dare even attempt to do that.
It's probably on YouTube somewhere.
No,
Search hard.
I think they had YouTube back then, right,
I
Brian?
guarantee it's not there. It's a funny, quick story. Cheryl and I were down at the beach the other day, and there's this weekend is this air show thing, and
Yeah.
Sammy Hagar Band is playing there, and Cheryl's like, "Oh, who's that?" And I said, "Well, his biggest claim to fame is he took over for David Lee Roth when David Lee Roth left Van Halen." I said, but his second biggest claim to fame is he almost played with my band in L.A. when we played one time, but they bumped him for a guy named Nick Gilder from Canada, and so we opened up for Nick instead of Sammy. But that was, crazy stuff.
Well, all these guys, some people get mad at me, but I like 60s rock. And so, it's good music. That's number one, why people listen to it still. But number two, it's almost like these people are still alive, but they aren't.
Yeah.
And you'll see young kids today wearing Hendrix T-shirts, Led Zeppelin T-shirts, the Beatles, the Who, etc. Yeah. But so what I'm talking about these people, because these are sad stories. Jimi Hendrix overdosed on drugs.
Yeah.
So did Janis Joplin. So did Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that joined the so-called 27 Club later. Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse. So what I'm saying is, like, you admire these people. You look up to these iconic figures. They were great artists. They were very talented, but their lives ended far too soon. So don't make the same mistake that they made, because look at what their decisions led them to. Amy Winehouse said of fame is like terminal cancer. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But, so many young people today, they get kind of that adrenaline rush, when they get a few more followers on their Instagram account, and they think that's what it's all about, and becoming a so-called influencer. And so what I'm saying is, it's not bad that you want to influence. It's not bad that you want your life to have significance, but don't think that mere influence and even fame to a certain degree is going to satisfy you. What you really want, or maybe I should say, who you really want, is the Lord.
Yeah.
And so, but it is a real phenomena of today where we're sort of having a flashback. And so, Brian, we've talked about this before, but we're finally going to start shooting Jesus Revolution the first of next year. It got put on hold because of COVID. So we're going to go back into the past, into the late 60s, early 70s, and we're going to tell the story of what happened when God poured his Spirit out and the Jesus movement happened, and your father-in-law, your mother-in-law, and we just celebrated her life in that memorial service. And, many of us acknowledge that Kay was sort of Kay is the wife of Chuck, in case you don't know, but Kay's sort of the unsung hero of the Jesus movement, because she had the passion to pray for the hippie kids, and Chuck was a little more apprehensive at first, but they opened their heart up, and it was a spontaneous move of God. But, Chuck was a very conservative guy. Chuck was not like some hipster guy. He was just, as you know, Brian, just very conservative, salt of the earth kind of a guy. But he saw that God was working, and he opened the church up. And, if there had only been a Lonnie and no Chuck, who knows what this would have turned into. But it couldn't have just been a Chuck without a Lonnie. Lonnie and Chuck were like nitro and glycerin coming together. But Chuck was established sort of the banks of the river so the water could flow. And he, he kind of, okay, now we go to church on Sunday and we open the Bible. And, he gave us our theological grid so we didn't go crazy and turn into some nutty group.
Yeah. It's really interesting, kind of the resurgence of interest in the Jesus movement. And, you and I next week, along with a number of other people, we're going to be involved in this Ablaze conference with Biola University.
Yes.
And these guys are putting on a whole conference because they want to go back and they want to revisit those days and say, what did God do? And could he do that again?
Yeah.
And I think you and I both are believing that he not only can do it again, but I think he will do it again.
I pray so.
And I think a lot of times, we can look back on the 60s especially, and even the first half of the 70s for sure. And we've got a nostalgic view of it. We think of, today, of course, we think of the Beatles as just, there was just this wonderful young group of lads from Liverpool, and we forget like all the drugs and the crazy stuff with Eastern religion and, all the nutty stuff that went on there. But as we look back on it, you realize it was a time of utter international turmoil.
Yeah.
The world was crazy.
Yep.
The world was imploding.
Yes.
When the Jesus people, awakening, whatever we want to call it, God just stepped into a mess.
He did.
And started to fix a bunch of people's lives.
Yeah. And, it can be sort of summed up in 2 Time magazine covers. There was the ominous cover, late 60s, black, red letters reversed out, "Is God dead?" Question mark. Then like 2 years later, maybe 3 years later, this really psychedelic, vibrant, colorful cover with an image of Jesus, and it just says Jesus Revolution. And it's funny because in the day, we didn't call it the Jesus Revolution.
Right.
We just called it the Jesus Movement. We called ourselves Jesus People. But Time magazine called it a revolution. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was actually kind of insightful.
Yeah.
It was a revolution that rocked the church. And, I was just thinking the other day about California, because California gets thrown under the bus a lot. And we have a lot of problems in California. I jokingly said the other day on Twitter, I'm going to stay in California because someone has to be here to turn the lights off. Because everyone's leaving. But then I said, but actually, I want to turn the light on here and proclaim the gospel. But I was thinking of a story about Billy Graham, how he was having a crisis of faith and some doubt. And he went up to Forest Home. And so he went up there and made a recommitment to the Lord and laid his Bible out on a tree stump, said, "I believe every word of this book." He went from that to L.A., where he spoke at a tent revival that launched his international ministry. Okay, so that's one huge revivalist thing that happened in California. Then you take the Jesus movement. Again, California. So, sometimes in dark places, the light shines maybe a little brighter.
Yeah, it's interesting. Cheryl recently did a 4-part podcast on Amy Semple McPherson. And that whole thing around her life and the establishing of the Foursquare Church and all that. And, that was back in the 20s. And there was even a bit of a revival surrounding that. And then, of course, the Azusa Street thing that preceded that.
Right.
And I'm with you. I saw that that post, and I thought, And I'm a 5th-generation Californian. Cheryl's a 5th-generation Californian. And it's like people are going, "Are you going to move?" It's like, heck no. Where am I going to go?
Yeah.
This is my life. Plus, this is where God's called us to be. So, I think we've seen over time, what happens is things kind of go down in a society and people flee. They're like, we got to get out. We got to get out of the cities. We got to go to the suburbs and all that. They evacuate. Sin proliferates. Things go from bad to worse. But, Christians need to stay in because we're the salt and the light.
Yep.
So we can't leave California. We got to stay here and turn the lights on. Like
That's right.
Said.
In the days of the early church, the church had turned the world upside down. Rome was ruling with an iron fist, with Pax Romana. And so a series of plagues came into Rome, and people were deserting the cities, and the Christians stayed.
Yeah.
And they cared for the people, and people started to change their attitude toward these Christians. Well, who are these people? Yeah. These loving people, these caring people, these giving people. And I think that's kind of a thing we need to keep in mind, because I see division in the church and things become very politicized. Listen, if I know more about your stand on mask wearing or not mask wearing or pro or anti-vaccine than I know about your faith in Jesus, Houston, we have a problem. And so a lot of these people who've let politics become more important or other issues become more important, I would quote Jesus and say, return to your first love. It's time for us to remember what we're all about, because I want to reach everybody. I don't want to just reach Republicans. I want to reach liberals. And the fact is, most non-believers are liberals. There's plenty of non-believing conservatives, don't get me wrong. But a lot of them are liberal. They need Jesus. And I want to build bridges instead of burn them.
Yeah. Amen.
Good stuff. If you've just joined us, you're listening to a special edition of Pastor's Perspective. Greg Laurie from the Harvest Crusade is our guest. He's the pastor of the Harvest Church in Riverside and Irvine and just about everywhere. You've got satellite campuses everywhere. And this Sunday is the SoCal Harvest at Angels Stadium in Anaheim. You can find out more about it at socal.harvest.org. We're going to take a quick break and then keep talking to Greg for another half hour or so here on Pastor's Perspective. So hang on.
Say hello. There's a theme song, but they can't hear it.
Hello, and thank you so much for listening and watching Pastor's Perspective. I'm Brian Perez. Hello to everybody on Greg Laurie's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Wow, now I'm famous. This is so cool. Thank you so much for doing this, Greg. Wow. I'm like instant celebrity. No, I'm joking.
I told Brian I would get you to do that for him, Greg. He's been looking for some way to promote himself.
Yes, it's the springboard. The springboard that Greg was talking about
Don't worry,
earlier.
Greg's going to come in and I'll get him to film it.
This will do it. Awesome. Right. Well, thank you. Greg Laurie is our guest today. Greg from the SoCal Harvest, happening this Sunday at Angel Stadium in Anaheim. Come on out. Starts at 7 p.m. Pacific time. It's going to be live streamed on Harvest's website, and we'd love to see you there. Brian Brodersen is here in the studio as well, and we're going to keep talking about Harvest. One thing I wanted to ask you, Greg, you mentioned the Jesus Revolution movie that's going to start filming again in a few months. How is that different from the movie that's coming out this weekend about the Jesus music?
Good question. Okay, so that's also from the Irwin Brothers, and the title of that movie is The Jesus Music, and it's about how this whole thing started. Of course, we know how it started. The whole Jesus movement didn't start at Calvary Chapel. It broke out spontaneously around the world, but this was clearly an epicenter here. And Michael W. Smith in the film talks about how he went into a record store and found that white album with that red bird on the red dove, the Maranatha dove. That was the first Christian music he listened to, and it had a profound influence on people like Michael W. Smith, Amy Grant, then all the groups that followed. And so they were kind of the forerunners of what became the very popularized form of contemporary Christian music. So they spend a lot of time in this film going back to the roots. They have a whole section on Love Song and Larry Norman, and Love Song will be with us at that conference at Biola University. Right. So, they talk about how it happened here and how it was born from a revival. Okay, so that's called a documentary film, Brian Perez. But the Jesus Revolution will be a feature film, which means there'll be actors cast in the roles of Pastor Chuck, Lonnie Frisbee, myself, and Kathy, and others. So it's not the story of me. It's not the story of Chuck. It's not the story of Lonnie. It's the story of the Jesus movement. Yeah. And through these four characters, and there'll be someone portraying Kay as well. Through these four characters, you kind of enter the story. So through Chuck's character, you enter it as sort of an older person looking at what was happening. Through Kathy's character, you enter it through a younger woman, or me as a younger man. It's a young guy that's going to play me in the film. And so what we're going to try to do to the best of our ability, and I say they're doing it, I'm not doing it. They're going to try to take you back in time and let you experience it. And feel it, because there's something about a film. Think about a film you've seen that moves you emotionally, and you're touched by it, and it disarms you. That's the power of art, and that's the power of cinema that can reach you in a way a sermon can't reach you. Not that it's better or worse. God uses sermons and works through the preaching of the gospel and the teaching of the word. But a film is a powerful tool. And John Irwin says, my job is to sort of set the volleyball up for the preacher to spike it. So he tells stories. He doesn't preach sermons in his movies. He tells stories. And this is his vision. When I first met John, he came to me with a Time magazine, said, I want to make a movie about this. And I've been wanting to meet someone that was there. Well, I was there. I had a front row seat. I was just a kid. And so I told him everything I knew. And so this movie is being made. It was supposed to have been made a while ago, but now looking back, Brian, coming back to your earlier point, I think this is the perfect time. So I was talking to a young man the other day, and he said, do you think today is parallel to the late 60s, early 70s? And I said, yes, because I was born in the 50s, so I've been around for the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. The 80s are not parallel to this time. The 90s are not parallel to this time. The late 60s, early 70s are. Yeah. Racial riots on the streets, division, lack of trust in government. Of course, Nixon was, resigning. So many things unraveling. And I once asked Chuck the question, Chuck, do you ever think we'll see another Jesus movement? And his answer was, Greg, I don't know if we're desperate enough. I think people might be getting desperate enough.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. Yeah. You know what's crazy? I just watched the the Ken Burns documentary on Muhammad Ali.
I watched that.
Isn't that amazing?
It was really interesting.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I've always been a big Muhammad Ali fan. And you know, I knew generally, I think I've seen all the movies about him, but what struck me about this one that I didn't realize the extent of was his activism.
Yeah.
And his black nationalism, which, you know, you understand it if you understand all of that context. But I thought, and another thing I thought is like, wow, that era too, that was the era where like there was, like Ali became a worldwide figure and he became an idol for black people all over the world. Now, he was hated by many people, obviously, as well. But, you know, in Africa, he became an icon in Africa and things like that. But I was thinking, I mean, he's there. Remember that one picture? He's there in the ring with the Beatles, goofing around, you know, and throwing that punch. And they're all looking like they're knocking over. But they had a similar worldwide impact. I was thinking, what an interesting era where all of these sort of icons were raised up and people were looking to the Beatles. They were looking to Ali. They were looking to these figures for give us some answers, you know, help us, tell us what life is about. And, you know, we're kind of at a place like that again. But there's not one or even 5 people like that today. Yeah. But what a great opportunity. I was listening to a podcast today about the topic of intersectionality. And, you know, intersectionality is the idea that if you stand at an intersection, you can see a lot more than people who aren't at an intersection. So if your life was marked by various forms of marginalization, you have a better take on life and you have more to say than somebody who's just – so a black lesbian woman has a lot more to say than a white male corporate guy. You know, that's intersectionality. Well, the guy in the podcast was talking about if you want to give credibility to intersectionality and you want a voice that can speak from that perspective, Jesus was that guy. Wow. He was from the Jewish nation, which is the most persecuted group of people in the history of the world. Right. He was not only marginalized as part of the nation, but he was marginalized by the nation itself. True. And, you know, so he just broke down how Jesus, if you want to give credence to the idea of intersectionality and somebody having a voice, Jesus has that voice.
In a way, you could say the conservatives of the day didn't like Jesus because that would have been the Pharisees. Yeah. You know, the Pharisees weren't always bad. They were obviously, you know, went to extremes, but they, you know, they were very fervent and orthodox in their beliefs. Yeah. But then again, Jesus crossed racial lines. He leaves Israel and goes to the woman of Samaria. He uses a Samaritan in a positive way in an illustration. We call it the story or the parable of the Good Samaritan. So he broke what we might think are rules today, but Jesus wanted to reach people. You know, I came up with an acronym the other day. I don't know if it's very good, but I'll throw it out there. I call it BLAST, B-L-A-S-T. So if you want to reach someone, blast them. Now, we think that means yell or scream. Yes. Here's what BLAST stands for. B, build a bridge. L, listen. A, ask questions. S, share your testimony. T, tell them about Jesus. So I think when we engage in evangelism, we go to blast mode, like we're going to yell at you, and now I've evangelized. No, you've just yelled at a person and probably turned them off. So first build a bridge. Like, hey, how are you? Tell me about yourself. Listen to what they say. You know, effective evangelism one-on-one is a dialogue, not a monologue. It's not a sermon. You know, so ask questions or listen. A, ask questions. And then S, best way to start a conversation, share your testimony. Before you get to the sermon, tell them your story. Tell them what Jesus did for you. Paul almost did that on pretty much every occasion when he stood before secular leaders. He told his story of his conversion. And then, of course, T, tell them about Jesus.
You know, it's interesting. Like we're in the so-called postmodern era, and one of the differences, you know, kind of looking at postmodernism versus modernity, which preceded it, is that in modernity the scientist had the voice. Yeah. In postmodernity, the artist has the voice. Wow, interesting. So people, but story is a big part of the artistic thing, right? But you think of, man, the Bible is stories.
It is.
It's one big story, but it's full of stories. And I was thinking how, just what you said, Greg, like people, so in the postmodern time, people want to hear stories.
Yes.
They don't necessarily want you to rattle off a bunch of facts.
Yeah.
They want to hear a story. A testimony is a story.
It is.
It's your story.
That's so true.
About what God did.
And did not Jesus really primarily speak through parables and stories and illustrations that everyone could understand? And it says the common people heard him gladly. That just means regular people got it. Yeah. And I think that, my objective is not to impress people. I don't know that I could even if I wanted to. But, I want to come down on a level where people understand what I'm saying. So I don't assume my listener understands theological terms. So that doesn't mean I won't use them. But what it does mean is I'll define them as I go. So, because I feel like I was talking to this guy today, he's not a believer, and I invited him to come to the crusade. I said, here, come to the crusade, and here's why. Make an intelligent decision based on the facts as opposed to what you think the facts are, or a preconceived notion that you have, but you've never really looked into this. Just come and hear what the Bible says, what Jesus says about himself, then you decide. So that's what the crusade is about. But that's why I need people to get non-believers there.
That's right.
Yeah. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything?
I just want to say that this is Pastor's Perspective. My name is Brian Perez. We've got Greg Laurie in the studio and Brian Brodersen. Greg, when you share your faith, people probably think Greg hits a home run every time. He shares his faith at the coffee shop, at wherever, and people just always come to Christ. And maybe that discourages some people because they can't be Greg Laurie. Have you had quote unquote failures? Have you,
let me add to that question.
Okay.
Because Greg, you said this earlier, like the hardest part is the takeoff and the landing.
Yeah.
Right. Do you struggle ever on a personal level with how do I start this conversation about Jesus?
Yes, because I don't want to come off like a weirdo. Yeah. And so and I try to do it very conversationally. I'll just talk, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Whatever. And just go from whatever my point of entry is. And sometimes I'll just say a little something. And other times I'll feel directed to say a little something more. And then only when directed, I'll feel like it's time to close the deal. And close the deal, I mean, that's landing. That's like asking the question, popping the question. Yep. Would you like to accept Jesus Christ right now? It's sort of like when you propose. I don't know how it went with you, Brian, but my wife, Kathy, says, you never properly proposed to me. I said, what do you mean? She says, we're in a restaurant, and you looked at me and said, well, I guess we're getting married. Huh? Really? Yeah. So I don't remember, so I have to go with her version.
Yes.
Well, we've
40
been married,
years later.
Yeah, 47 years.
47.
48, actually. But the thing is, it's awkward because you don't want them to say no. But I wonder sometimes if some Christians are afraid to ask them if they would like to accept Christ because they're afraid they'll say yes. Like,
right.
Oh, like, what do I do now? Right? But it's such a joy to do that. And yes, in answer to your question, sure, I've had times people, no, I don't want to talk about that. They cut the conversation off.
Yeah.
I usually start I call it chumming. Like when you go out and you put a little bait in the water. So I don't just go straight to the chase, but I might say something about prayer or my faith or something to kind of get the conversation going. You'll know pretty quickly if a person doesn't want to have that conversation. But I think it's good to just get in the habit of it and just try to find those little opportunities. And maybe you'll have a miss, a bite, an interest, and then you get this person that's like ready to totally listen.
Yeah.
And you don't know if you don't put your hooks in the water.
That's right.
And chum the water a little bit.
So, Greg, the other day you and I we're having a little brief conversation about revival.
Yeah, we text back and forth a lot.
And about awakening. So these are two terms that are commonly used in literature to talk about. We've heard about the Great Awakenings. Yeah. And so Jonathan Edwards and people like that, and George Whitefield, the Great Awakening. And then we hear about revivals. We hear about, like, more locally, like the Azusa Street revival. We hear about the 18th century revival, the Welsh revival, whatever. So I was just having this thought because I was thinking about this, and I just had this thought, like this, the Jesus people thing. We'll just call it that for lack of a better term. But the Jesus people thing, because I was reading something, and the guy was arguing that in order for what we want to see. Basically, when we're talking about, we want to see the gospel impact society. Mm-hmm. We want to see it go outside of the walls of the church and touch people's lives. And so, one guy was arguing, and historically you can build a good case that oftentimes what happens is the church kind of, starts off excited and everybody's, following Jesus. And then after time, it all kind of, settles down and dies down. And then it kind of gets into a sleepy state or a dead state. So revived means to be brought back to life or to wake up again. So the argument is, okay, the church has got to do that before you can have this other thing out in society, which I think the church does need to be revived. I'm not arguing against that. But I just had this thought, so I texted to Greg. I said, but the what we call the Jesus people thing, it wasn't really exactly like that.
Yeah, true.
What was happening is out in the culture, people were getting saved, not connected to a church.
True.
I was not connected to a church. You were not connected to a church.
Right.
God was doing something. So all of this to say, I was talking to these two young guys the other day, 21-year-old guys, and they're excited. They're part of YWAM, and they were telling me all the stuff they're doing. And they said, the one guy said to me, he goes, I'm at these churches, and they're telling me that it's a revival, but I don't know if it's a revival. And I said, it's not. It's not a revival. I said, because I lived through one. And I'll tell you, when it gets here, you won't even ask the question, is it a revival? You will know it's a revival.
Very true.
Because people are just going to, like you just described, Greg, and we all have that same thing. Sometimes you think, gosh, we got the best news in the world, but nobody wants to hear it.
Yeah.
Sharing the gospel is like pulling teeth, know, sometimes. But in these kinds of seasons where God is doing something extraordinary supernaturally, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, people are just like walking up to you, how do I get saved? Kind of stuff, right?
Yes. I was thinking about different awakenings, like you mentioned George Whitefield. So George Whitefield from England comes over and preaches before we're officially a nation, speaking in the colonies. The churches weren't working together to put on a George Whitefield crusade. In fact, he preached open air because there were no churches that wanted him inside. And thousands of people came to Christ. Okay, then think of Jeremiah Lamphere, I think, in New York. He starts a prayer meeting. No one comes. Then the stock market crashes. And all of a sudden, people are filling theaters. So one is a guy preaching in a field. Another one is a guy starting a prayer meeting. So fast forward to the Jesus movement. It was a spontaneous move of God. There's a book out. I know you've read it. It's called God's Forever Family. And I think he's going to be at that conference at Biola.
Larry Eskridge.
Yeah, Larry Eskridge. Yeah. And I thought it was a very good book, very scholarly book. Yeah. I wrote a book called Jesus Revolution, which is more my version of it. But I think he wrote the scholarly book, and I quote from his book, as a matter of fact. But he made this great statement toward the end of the book. He said, the churches that opened their door to the Jesus movement experienced revival. The churches that did not experience revival. That's right. And Chuck opened the doors. He saw it. He saw the potential. But he also took risks. And he said, okay, who are these guys? Love Song, one of them serving jail time for a drug thing. These guys are amazing. Maybe we should record them. Let's go record. Who would have done that? Right. We're a bunch of crazy hippies. He's practical enough. Let's do this. Let's do that. So there was a practical person. I jokingly referred to him as if we were on a big giant ship, Chuck was sort of like, the captain, and he even looked like the captain on the Love Boat, if you remember that old show, similar. But anyway, so he was sort of that stabilizing guy, but he gave a place for a guy like this renegade preacher, Lonnie Frisbee. I can't think of many churches that would let a guy like that in. But Lonnie was the guy who was preaching on my high school campus when I came to Christ. Yep. He got my attention. So in a way, I came for Lonnie and I stayed for Chuck, right? So they each had their role, and we all have our role. So Brian, you and I, we used to be the young guys. Now we're the old guys.
What? How did that happen?
So, it's like a relay race. So Chuck ran with that baton. He handed it on, and we're holding the baton, and we'll carry it for a little while, and we'll hand it on to a younger generation, and then they'll do the same for that's how it works, right? So we want to just keep passing these things on, but boy, I think that it was very unusual. It was a youth revival. I've never read of anything like that. Have you, Brian?
No, nothing, never.
And it seemed to be.
I mean, maybe the closest thing would be the Welsh revival.
Okay.
The Welsh revival
really?
did have a strong youth element in it, yeah. But it wasn't. I mean, this was almost like, in some senses, on the first wave of it was really youth.
It was,
wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then adults came later as a result of the influence of the youth on them.
I would say they were revived by. I would say the awakening of the youth coming to Christ, and that revived the older believers who had been around. Like the old song from Love Song says, long hairs, short hairs, coats and ties, people finally coming around, looking past the hair and straight into the eyes, people finally coming around. It's very plain to see. It's not the way it used to be, right? Yeah. That's Little Country Church. And that was about Calvary Chapel, by the way. So when I came in as a kid with long hair, there's these conservative people. And at first they're like, what is going on? But then they're starting to see, wow, this is real. And that is reviving them. So it's kind of an interesting way it all happened.
Yeah, amazing.
Warren Wiersbe once said, if you can explain it, God didn't do it.
Yeah, that's true. And if you can create it, God's not doing it. You're doing it.
I agree with that.
So Greg, going back to the Jesus Revolution film, is it at all taken from the script of your book, or no?
They're using my book sort of as kind of the base for it, but they've written an entire screenplay. And so it's very different than my book. And it's so well written. It's so interesting to read. And it's full of humor. It's fun. It's interesting. It's moving. It brings you to tears at times. I mean, it's written for the screen. It's written for actors to say lines and casting the right actors and all the art that goes into. You talked about art, getting people's attention. All the art that goes into making those things work and that scene moving you, right? Yeah. So, and John Irwin knows how to direct a film for sure.
Yeah. So is Jim Gaffigan still in the role of Chuck?
No, early on he was cast in the role of Chuck, and he's not in that role, so they're still going to cast Chuck. Okay. Chuck has not been cast. They've cast a young man who's going to play me, and why am I blanking out on his name right now? It'll come to me. Joel Courtney, who was in, what was it, Super 8 a while ago, a Spielberg film, and he's in a Netflix show called The Kissing Booth, right? So he's going to play young Greg, and they haven't cast Kathy yet, and they're very close to casting Lonnie. I can't say who it's going to be because it's not confirmed, but people are going to be very excited by the person they cast as Lonnie.
Interesting.
Really? Very excited.
Well, it's funny because on the website, it still has Jim Gaffigan in the role. And somebody was saying to me the other day, is he still doing it? I said, I don't think he is. They got to
change that.
But yeah, they need to do that on the website. But I was thinking, Chuck was 38 years old.
Yes.
He wasn't 60 years old. So we need to get a 40-year-old guy, in that role. Yeah. If it's going to be, true to the time.
Right.
But it's hard to think that Chuck was only, 38, 40, right?
He just always seemed older to me because I was so young. We were all so young. And I was even younger than a lot of guys because all like Love Song, all those guys, they were like 9 to 10 years older than me. Yeah. So they were like adult men with families. And I was literally just a young kid still. Yeah. And so Chuck just, he was the adult in the room. And so, it's kind of hard to think of him as a young man, but he was a pretty young guy then.
Because now, when we think of 40-year-olds, we think, gosh, that guy's young. A kid.
I talked to someone the other day. I'm 40. I said, you're young still. Trust me. Just trust me.
Yep.
Cool. All right, Greg, just the last minute, just kind of invite people out for Sunday.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me in. I really appreciate it. So this Sunday night, the SoCal Harvest. It starts officially at 7 o'clock p.m. I would really encourage you to get there early. I think there's going to be a lot of people there. Doors open at 5 o'clock. We're going to have a pre-worship set like before the event starts, so it's going to be great. You'll be having a great time there early. For King and Country, and Phil Wickham will be performing. I'll be speaking. And at the end, we'll have a fireworks show. I think it's going to be an epic night. It's not going to be like any crusade you've ever been to before. As I've mentioned earlier, if you tuned in late, we're using a lot of tech to make this a very immersive event. I think it will be almost a more intimate Harvest Crusade, but also one that will be it will probably dazzle you a little bit too. But the focus of the event, as always, is the proclamation of the gospel. Chuck Smith had the original vision for this crusade, and we started at the Pacific Amphitheater. Fast forward 31 years later, we've been going to the Angel Stadium. So we're very excited about it because we weren't meeting there last year because of COVID. But this year it's one night only. So I hope you can come, and it will be live at harvest.org if you want to tune in and watch it.
Yep, and I think a lot of people will be there because of it only being one night. Yep. Whereas before, people might choose, I'll go Friday. Well, There's no Friday. There's no Saturday. There's only one. Sunday, October 3rd, be there. Angel Stadium of Anaheim starts at 7. Gates open at 5. Get all the details at socal.harvest.org. And the Ablaze Conference happening next weekend at Biola University that these guys were talking about. You can find out more about that and purchase your tickets at biola.edu/ablaze. So thank you so much for listening to Pastor's Perspective and for watching as well. And we'll see you at the SoCal Harvest. The flagship station, KWAVE, is going to be there, so stop by the booth and wave hi, and most importantly, bring someone who doesn't know the Lord to the SoCal Harvest. For Brian Brodersen and Greg Laurie, I'm Brian Perez. Pastor's Perspective is sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.